Hello everybody, it's Chris, and it is a cold and snowy January of 2025. And today's story is about a tractor that, well, isn't mine, but it lives here on the farm at Losey's Home for Wayward Olivers. This is my good friend Phil's Oliver 2150. You've probably seen it in a couple of videos, and how I mentioned that unfortunately the serial number tag is missing on this tractor. The batteries are out of it right now too. But normally it would be screwed onto the dash right there in their area. For a long time, well, actually for a short time, they decided to switch and start attaching them to the dash. That was a bad idea. They were so easy to take off. Someone took this one off as opposed to be riveted into the cast iron down here. So Phil really would like to know what his serial number was. I've discussed that. And there's another way, is by the engine serial number, which is behind this plate that holds the fuel filters. So I pulled them, and there is no serial number back there. My best guess is, for some reason, the engine block had to be replaced, and a block out of parts would not have a serial number because serial numbers are for complete engines, and that would explain why it wasn't stamped. So then we have basically almost no idea. The good news is I got it figured out. Before we get into the how I figured it out, let's get into the how did it get here in the first place. To tell the tale of Phil's 2150, we have to go all the way back to my good friend Blaine, who owns this Super 88. It was somewhere around 10 years ago. Corn was $7, soybeans were $15, and farmers had money. And if you know farmers, it burns a hole in their pocket. They will spend it. And so the price of four-wheel drive Olivers was skyrocketing. They became very collectible. They still are. But that's kind of when they took off, that 2013, 2014 era. And Blaine thought, well, I'm going to get on this. And we knew from doing some of our research and stuff that Nebraska and the northern part of New York were kind of hotbeds for four-wheel drive Olivers. The snow in Nebraska, the hills and mountains in New York. So Blaine put some ads in local farm papers in each area and got some responses, and he ended up buying two 2150 front wheel assists out of upstate New York. I've got some pictures of them, because what happened next, he acquired them, and then through fellow Oliver collector and dealer George Corrin, Blaine was able to get them moved more to our area. And he wanted to at least get one fixed up to run through an auction, and needed someone to do that. And Phil, his dream tractor was a 2150 front wheel assist. Alan and Phil and Blaine struck up a deal. He needed both tractors worked on, either one, whatever, to get it in a show condition to where it could be sold at this auction. And Phil really wanted one, so he said he would sell one to Phil, and in exchange, if we worked on the other one to get it up to snuff. Of course, that was with my supervision here in my shop, and he told him he could take his pick of whichever one he wanted, and they got all the details hammered out, come up with that, and that's what we did. We worked on the other one, and I'll put pictures of that in here too. And that one needed a lot of work. That's probably a story on its own. We knew the transfer case was ragged out on it ahead of time. Ended up the front axle was too. They had mismatched gears in it, but we got her all straightened out. So Phil picked the other one, which is what we've got here at my place at Losey's Home for Wayward Olivers. Overall, I personally thought it was the better of the two. I think the engine ran a little bit better on the other one, but I knew with the work it was going to need that it was going to take a lot to get it up to snuff. So Phil went with the one that I liked, and that was also the one that had no serial number tag and no serial number on the block. Well, at that time we didn't realize it was missing on the block. I said, no big deal, Phil. The museum can reverse it out. If you have your serial number, someone was just asking, I'll throw this in here, where they are on like these like Super 88s and stuff. Right here on this flange is where this one is. Later on the Waukesha's, they moved them to right in here. But generally speaking, it's a little extra fee, but if you have that engine serial number and call up the museum and you don't have your serial tag, they will find which tractor that engine went into, because they're written on the back. But it's pretty tedious for them because they have to go through and read the back side of every card to find the right engine serial number. They didn't always go in sequential order. They can get it narrowed down to a certain area, but there's still a bit of looking for them. So I thought, okay, Phil, this is no problem. We can just reverse out your serial number. Well, later on, once we had Blaine's project done and could concentrate some on Phil's, I pulled the filters off to look for that serial number, and there's none. That's where I assumed, like I was saying earlier, that probably at some point the engine block had been replaced, and since it was a parts thing and not a complete engine, they never would have stamped a serial number in it. So then we were up a creek. I'm hoping that in editing I can pull up the brightness in here. It's not the brightest in this barn. The skylights got some snow on them. The interior lights ain't the brightest. It's cold and it's blustery, so we ain't firing this thing up and moving it somewhere else. Well, that kind of gets us up to now. Alan and Phil and I were planning on at some point just going to the Floyd County Museum in Charles City and going through the build cards. There's something called, in my past research there at the museum, something they kept track of. It's something like this. Are called summary sheets. And as they came off the line, they would keep track of, they had different sheets for each model. Some models they kept more details than others. 2150s, they kept track of two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive. And then, like if they built 5 in a row, they'd write down 5, the last serial number of those 5, and then the running tally for that lot number, what day it was, and just something, a brief overview of how they were building them. And that's where I've gotten a lot of my my production numbers for front wheel assist on these models. I spent a lot of time there at the museum digging through this stuff, and it takes a while. So anyways, so we were figuring on going out to the museum and having to dig through cards. We could find, there's like casting numbers, serial casting dates cast right into the front frame, the rear end. I think it's underneath on the bottom where it's not too hard to see once you crawl under there. But clues as to, roughly when this tractor would have been built. Generally, my experience is there's 2 to 4 months between the time the parts are cast and the time the tractor was actually assembled. It takes time for some of that stuff to cure, machining, all that stuff. So, it's a process. But that would narrow it down. If the dates all were in 69 on it, we would know it was not a 1968 tractor. That would narrow down our search. Now, one of the big things I felt that was going to narrow down our search is the tires. The rear tires are 20.8 38s. And I can't say I've ever seen another 2150 with this size of tire. And then even weirder is 16.9 24s. Usually when they got to this diameter, or I'm sorry, this width, they went to a taller rim, a 26-inch rim. And here this one has 24s. It all matches up as far as gear ratios. It works nice in the field and everything. So, but it's like, okay, there couldn't have been too many of them built that way. It was already a low production model. They only made them for 2 years, 1,018 total units of all variations. And I'm trying to remember now, but was it 300 and some in front wheel assist, somewhere in there. So I knew, okay, we can probably narrow this down, pull the front wheel assist cards from the same time frame that this would have been built based on casting dates, and then start looking for codes. Front tires are letter K on the build card. Rear tires are letter G. The build card tells them how to build the tractor as it goes down the line. And so I figured with those little tidbits, and then one other thing we discovered when we were working on it at first is it's got the no spin front differential. And from also doing all my research, I know Each axle has its own code because while they look identical on the outside, on the inside, they have different gear ratios to make sure that the front and rear tires have the same ground speed. And but whenever you opted for the no spin front differential, that gave it a 099 code, or a per special build order. We had 3 clues. 16.924s are K56, 20.8 38s are G90, and then we had a U, which is the front axle code, of 99. So with all this, that should, you know, and then the other thing, well, I try to keep track of everything I'm going to do. I need to write scripts. Is it has a dealer sticker on it from Divines in Ferrisburg, Vermont. So we could also, if there ended up being 2 that were really close together, equipped identical, chances are they both didn't get shipped to the same part of the country. They could have, but you know, that's on one more clue to help us make sure we get the right one. Take all that information, go to the museum, and just start digging. And that was a someday project, or as I like to call them, a summer project. Some are going to get done and some aren't. And we hadn't gotten to it yet. Well, we jump forward to this year, 2024, because it's now 2025. And I was contacted by Tom Seberg. He is an enthusiast that's been researching the production information there at the museum, and just going over build codes and how to read these cards and the serial number plates and the data, and just trying to help him out wherever I can. And he had teamed up with his friend Derek Hoon. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your last name right, Derek. And the two of them got an old IBM punch card reader, because that's what these old build cards were on. This is just a printout of a picture of one, but you know, there's holes punched in for each number that gave the code. When you run it through the machine, the metal contacts could touch through those holes, and that would let the computer, as they called it back then, read the card. And so they got one of those old machines, were able to port it into a new laptop, take stacks of build cards and read them. Now this is a big project. There's probably somewhere, I'm guessing, around 250,000 cards to read when it's all said and done. So even though that thing feeds them through pretty quick, that's still a daunting task. Then there's things to do to make sure it's reading right, organizing it and everything. So to start out small, one of the first models they picked out was the 2050 and 2150 because of their low production numbers. The 2050 only had 383 total units made. The 2150, 1,018. And so Tom and I had been messaging back and forth quite a bit through Facebook about all these different codes and stuff, and it suddenly hit me. They had gotten all the cards read, they had them in a database. Essentially, they could plug in the codes for the wheels and the axle and find out which ones were built that way. Well, there was one drawback, and that is, I'll show this card again. This is the front side. You have your spec number over here. You have all your A through Z codes here. When they first started using these in the Super Series, A through Z were 2-digit numbers. They didn't have nearly as many options. And so they coded the serial number for the tractor on the card. By the time of the 50 series, there were a lot of 3-digit options. And so they took the serial number off the front and just wrote it on the back. The engine serial number is wrote on the back. And so that is not coded in on their database because it was not punched in. And so that's something to hopefully come down the road. But the big thing was to just get all this information in where it's easily searchable. So the museum, well, it should hopefully generate a new revenue source for them, because people will be able to call in, and it's too early to be calling in now. This is just preliminary stuff, just getting started on it. We're not even sure how long it's going to take, but you'll be able to call in and see how many were, Super 88s were built with diesel engines and, wide fronts with hydraulics. You can pick out the options that you want and see how many were built just like yours, or if yours is one of a kind. And I think that's going to be a great feature for people, and I think it'll be a good moneymaker for the museum too. Because if you know museums, keeping the bills paid is one of their biggest challenges. So anything we can do to help them out is great. So I have lost my train of thought. Oh yes. So Tom says, okay, you know, I've got all this information minus the serial numbers, but I'll look it up. And this is mid-December. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's almost Christmas. Phil is Alan's son. You've seen Alan on my videos before. It's been a while, but Phil would just, well, he'd really love to know what the serial number of his tractor is. And I'm sure Alan would have loved to give it to him as a Christmas present. So my goal was to get this figured out in time for Alan to buy the build card and get it in time to give as a Christmas present. So Tom punched the numbers in, and I knew this was going to be a rare combination, but it turns out there was only one tractor ever built with this tire combination. Only one 2150 built with this tire combination. So I'm like, we've pretty much got to have the right one. You know, I guess we can call and verify. It had all the other right codes. He sent me all the codes from that particular tractor. We didn't know the serial number yet, but it had a U99. It had adjustable rear axles and not the planetaries. They had the right hydraulic unit. Everything matched up. So I was quite confident it was it. Tom says it is 267 from the end. And I said, well, you know, and first we're like, okay, how we're going to do this? Call the museum, have them look back 267. Then I remembered those summary sheets that I had for research from, that's probably been 15 years ago or better since I did that research. I can just count back from the end and 267 units and find the number. And Tom replied with, yes, that'll should get you there. They did find a couple of cards that were out of place, a couple that were two cards because they'd been returned to the factory. He said basically because of those things, they could be off, the number could be off by 1 or 2 or something, give or take. But it should be right in there. So I go digging through that summary sheet and I find it, and it's actually in the 2-wheel drive column. I'm like, well, this ain't a good sign. We're, you know, really definitely got a 4-wheel drive tractor here, and there ain't any that very close to it in the serial number range that are 4-wheel drive. I'm just like, oh man, this, maybe my math is bad or something. So I call the museum, I get a hold of McKenna, give her the rundown on the whole thing, and say, we're looking for this card. It will have this spec number, G90, K56, U99, and it should have been shipped to Vermont. And she says, all right, I'll get back with you. I told her also, I'm thinking, I guess I should, yeah, I did tell her it was serial number 212644, give or take a couple. And so with those numbers, you know, knowing where to go look, and then those particular build numbers, the G and K codes and the U, she should be able to find it. The next day I get a call, and it's from the museum, and sure enough, they found it. It was 212645, and they'd pulled it out, had it ready to go. I said, this is fantastic. I'll give my friend Alan a call, and he can get it ordered, which he did. And he did get it in time for Christmas, and he got me a copy of it. And so I was able to do a little more research on it, and I found it interesting. On the back, so you see that was 421-22017. Well, to read that, we got to kind of know how these serial number tags and their spec numbers work. When the 50 series come out, they had 3-digit numbers for models. So say, let's see, well, Allen's 1755's right there. What other tractors are in here? But the first 3 digits of that spec number would tell you what model it was. You know, the sheet metal could be missing, and as long as you see that, when the 2050 and 2150 first came out, they were into the third generation of 50 series tractors, essentially. So they didn't necessarily start every model out at 1. There was never a 120, but the 2050 was assigned 320 for its spec number, and later 420. They made some changes, and there was a generation change partway through the production of the 20 and 2150s. 320, later 420. For the 2150s, they assigned it the 21. So the early ones were 321 and the later ones were 421. If they had continued on to the 55 series, it would have been 521. Like that 1755 is 575. It's kind of the 5th generation of that tractor, but it was a 55 series. They just kept going up from there. After those 3 digits, the first digit is front axle equipment. And we're basically concerned with 2 things at this point: the number 8 and the number 2. The number 8 means it's 4-wheel drive. So when you look at your serial number tag, which isn't on here, let's go look at Alan's. This is Alan's 1755. $575-22. That first digit after the 3, or the 4th digit essentially, is your front axle equipment. 2 is adjustable wide front for ag. 8 is front wheel assist for ag. So we knew that Phil's tractor was going to be a 421 because it was a later one. And then the next digit should be 8. And the build card said that, but on the back it says was 22017. Well, ends up Phil's tractor was built January 7th. Is that 7th? Or I get the wrong one. Yeah, that's it. January 7th. I was thinking it was the 2nd. My bad. So it's got a birthday coming up here in a couple days. So it was built on January 7th, but it wasn't shipped until December 27th of 69. They had discontinued producing 2150s, I think sometime in August of 69. So that means whoever placed the order for this had to go with whatever they had on inventory. They weren't building anymore. The 55 series was underway by December of 69. And my guess would be there was nothing left on the lot at the factory except for 2-wheel drive tractors. Well, Oliver's never one to not sell a tractor, and so they would pull them back into the factory and change out whatever was necessary. They took off the 2-wheel drive front axle, whether all 2-wheel drives had the outboard planetaries. So whether they swapped the whole rear end or disassembled it, put in a long pinion and changed out the axles, I don't know. It's going to be hard to probably never know that for sure. But one way or another, they changed the rear end out so it was set up with a transfer case and these adjustable rear axles. That might have just been the simplest solution for them, but that's how they did it. And boom, it's a 4-wheel drive they can ship out to a customer and get sold. And the customer must have ordered it this way, being the only one to ever have 20.8 38s and 16.924s. Just like I say, an odd combination. That's one thing we're learning from this database project is some of our numbers we thought we had as far as what was 2-wheel drive and what was 4-wheel drive are going to be different, which is awesome. To know what I've said it right along. The summary sheets only showed how they rolled off the line. The build card they would always change if they switched it at the factory. So the build card shows the final way it left the factory. It's still could have gotten changed at a branch warehouse or at the dealer, or the farmer can change it. If you're looking for the way it left the factory, the build card is going to tell you that. They created a new one and just wrote on the back what it used to be, I guess to keep track of things. So I really thought that was neat, that it used to be a 2-wheel drive tractor. Well, then I got thinking also, there is a website called oliverarchives.com, and one of the things they have on there is a map. It's a Google map, interactive with Oliver dealers across the U.S. They've put a request out on Facebook. If you know where your local Oliver dealer was, let them know, and they would add it to this map. And so Alan gets me a copy of the build card for this 2150. And I'm hoping it shows Vermont, and it says Swanton VT. Now that does kind of look like UT, but I looked up and there is no Swanton in Utah. There was a dealer in Swanton, Vermont by the name of Rene J. Fournier. Sounds kind of French, and that would be because it was just across the border from Montreal in Vermont. So that must have been the original selling dealer, just because this was optioned so specific. You don't order in a weird tractor just hoping someone will buy it. You order in something run-of-the-mill if you don't already have a customer for it. So, and then at some point I would say, I looked up Devines and Ferrisburgh. They were on the map as well. And they were located in Ferrisburgh, Vermont, which is about an hour south of Swanton. And then I do believe Blaine found this in New York, which this is also right on the lake there between Vermont or right on the border of New York. So it's very reasonable to understand or figure that it could have wandered into New York State. So I am very confident we have found the right tractor. Serial number 212645, born on January 7th of 1969. And shipped December 27th of 1969. That's I just thought everybody kind of enjoy that story. It's found its way here. You've seen the pictures. Someday Phil hopes to restore it. I don't know, it's fairly nice original, but a direct drive is out on it. That was one of the trade-offs between picking this and one of the other one that Blaine had sent here. Was neither one was perfect. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this story. I think it's kind of neat. I'm glad we finally figured out the mystery. And that's kind of what this whole database project, one of the things that might help people do, it's far from being done. So don't start calling the museum hoping they can just plug in some numbers and find your tractor. Right now you need either your tractor serial number or your engine serial number to get your build card. They'll be more than glad to help you out with either one. But hopefully someday down the road we can get all this stuff read, and then you'll be able to call the museum and ask them how many 2150s had 20.8 38 rear tires, and they will be able to tell you the answer. So really it turned out to just be a lot of luck in a lot of ways, that it was a unique enough tractor that was only going to be one. Fortunately, Phil knew the right people that knew the right people. I guess it doesn't change the tractor itself, but it definitely adds to its history. I don't know, it's cool, I think. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I really had fun figuring all this out. I really appreciate Tom and Derek helping me out with this. Keep supporting that museum. They got to be open for this to become available someday. So buy something there. They got lots of stuff in the gift shop. Thanks again. We'll talk to you later.